Hello everyone. In this video we're going to learn how to make Python programs interactive by using something called input function. Till now in our programs, whenever we want to use any data, we are directly specifying the values in the program like age is equal to 10, country is equal to India. But the problem with this is if we want to run this program with some different set of data, we need to modify the program and change these values. But that's not how real applications work, right? The user is not supposed to modify the program. So instead of specifying the values directly in the program, we would want the program to read the data directly from the user during the execution process. And that's where input function comes into picture. Now this input function is an inbuilt function that allows the program to read the data from the user. Let's see this example to understand how this works. Here we have a variable name to which we are not assigning any value directly, but we are making a call to input function along with some string argument, enter your name. It could be any string here, and whatever string we provide here is called prompt message. And it's not mandatory to provide it, but it is highly recommended because without a prompt message, the user might not understand what kind of data needs to be provided. Now what happens when this instruction is executed? First, the input function, it will display this prompt message in the output console. And input function pauses the program execution and waits for the user to type something and press enter. So until the user types something and presses enter, the program execution will be paused. Now let's say the user typed the name Sachin and pressed enter. Then the program execution continues and the input function reads this value and returns it here. And that value will be assigned to this variable name. And then it will go and execute the next line, which will print hello space Sachin. Let me now show you this practically. First, let me create a new Python file. So I'll right click on the project folder, select new Python file, and let me call this as user underscore input. All right. Now here, instead of specifying the value directly to this variable name, let's call input function and let's also give a prompt message. Enter your name. Now in the next line, let's simply print hello name. Now let me also add an additional print statement on the top saying program started. Now let's run this program and see what happens. Right click, run user input. So as you can see, first it executes the first line and so it prints program started. Then it goes to the next line. And here what will input function do? It will display this prompt, enter your name, and it pauses the execution. As you can see, the program is not completed. If the program execution is completed, you will see a process completed message in the console. But here you can see it is paused at this point. And it will only continue if we type something and press enter. Let's say I want to give a name Sachin. And now I press enter. Now as you can see that as soon as we press enter, the program execution continued. So first that name Sachin is assigned to this variable name, and next this line is executed and so it prints hello space Sachin. Also you can see that once the program execution is completed, it will display this message, process finished with exit code 0. Exit code 0 indicates the program is finished without any errors, and if we have any errors, the exit code will be 1. And one thing we can observe here is input function will not add any extra space after the prompt message. If you try to run this program again, and if you try to enter the input, you can see that there is no extra space created after the prompt message. Just in case if we want an extra space, we have to explicitly mention it inside the prompt message. Now if you try to run it again, now if you type your input, you can see there is a space created here because we added this space within the prompt message. And also when we try to enter the input, it doesn't matter where we click in this output console. You can click it here or you can click it here. But when you type your input, it will automatically start after the prompt message. I hope it is clear to you. Now what if we want the input to be entered in a new line? Then what we can do? instead of space, we can add /n, which indicates a new line character. Now if you try to run it again, now if you click somewhere and enter your input, we can see that the input started in the new line. So that's how you can display the prompt message in any way you want. And what if we don't give any prompt message at all? What if we simply call this input function, but we don't add anything inside? What happens now if we try to run it again? As you can see, the program is waiting for some input, but I don't understand what input I need to provide. So it's always recommended to use a proper prompt message. Now let's look into a very common pitfall when using input function. Let's say we want to take two integer numbers a and b, and we want to compute the sum and display it. So first I'm adding this print statement to display some description in the console. So let's say here a is equal to input of, let's give a prompt as enter first integer number. Similarly, let's take another variable b and let's assign input of enter second integer number. Now in the next line, let's add a print statement to display sum colon comma a plus b. So what are we trying to do here? We are trying to read two integer number values from the user, and we are trying to compute a plus b and display it. Now let's execute this program. Right click, run. And as the program execution starts from line 1, this input function tries to read the input first before coming to these lines. So let me comment out these lines so that we don't need to give all the inputs from the start. So first let me stop the program. This program is currently paused at this point. So to stop the program, we can press this red button. We can even press this button, right? Let me stop the program. So when you want to comment multiple lines at once, what we can do is we can select all these lines and we can press Ctrl+/ in Windows, or if you're using Mac, you can press Command+/ and it will comment all these lines at once. If you want to uncomment, again you can select and again press Ctrl+/. Also let me put colon space at the end of these prompt messages so that it will be properly formatted. Now let me run this again, right click, run. And as you can see, it says enter first integer number, let's say 10, and I'll press enter, it will continue. And again, we have an input function here. It says enter the second integer number. Let's type 20 and press enter. And surprisingly, this is the output we got, 1020. So what do we expect? We expect 10 plus 20 to be 30, but we got 1020. Let's now try to understand the reason for this output. The caveat here is input function always returns a string. That's why even if we think that we have given an integer value 10, input function basically returns a string. So what is assigned to this variable a is this string 10 and not an integer 10. Similarly, when we enter 20 here, what actually input function returns is this string 20, which is assigned to this variable b and not integer 20. And what happens when we use plus between two strings? It will simply concatenate these strings, right? So it will concatenate 1020 and it will create a string 1020. So how can we mitigate this issue now? We must always convert input data to appropriate data types whenever required before using the data in our program. Let's say this example. Here we are trying to assign a value to this variable name by using input function. And input function always returns a string, and name is also a string, right? So here we don't need to do any conversion. We can directly assign the value we get to this variable name. Now in the next line, we're trying to read the age of the user and we are assigning it to this variable age. Let's say the user types 20 and presses enter. So what input function returns is string 20 and not integer 20. We can use this int function to convert the string value 20 to integer 20. So we use this int function inside which we put the input function. So whatever value is returned, that will be converted to int and it will be assigned to this variable age. Similarly, in the next line, we are trying to read the price of the item, and price is generally expressed as a float value, right? It will be something like $10.99. So again here, when you enter this value, what input function returns is this string 10.99. And so here we need to convert this string to a float value. To do that, we can use float function, which will convert the value to float. So we use float of, inside which we call the input function. Now whatever value is entered, that will be converted to float and it will be assigned to this variable price. If we go back to our example, we want to convert the value which is written to integer here, right? So we will use int of and we'll put this input function inside int function. And we do the same here as well. Now the value of a will be integer 10, value of b will be integer 20. So it should display sum:30. So let me run the program, right click, run, enter first integer number, let me give 10, press enter. Second integer number, let me give 20, press enter, and you can see it correctly prints sum:30. Now let's take another example. Here we are trying to read the number of items purchased and the price of each item to calculate the total cost, which will be item count star price, right? That will give us total cost. Now here item count will be integer, count is always an integer value, right? So we will have to convert this value to int using int function, and price of an item will be a float value. So we will have to use float function to convert the value to float. First, let me comment the previous lines. Now let's run the program, right click, run, and it asks enter the number of items, let's say 20, and let's press enter. Now it asks enter price of one item, let's say $15.50, all right? Or in Indian currency, it is something like 15 rupees 50 paise, all right? Now let me press enter. So it calculates the value of item count star price, which is 20 star 15.50, whose value will be 310.0. So that's what will be displayed. So it's very important to remember that input function always returns a string. And so we need to convert the input into appropriate data types before using it in our programs. Now you might have one doubt here. So in this case, we are trying to read the input for number of items, and we are trying to convert that input value to an integer using int function. Now what if the user doesn't provide a valid input to convert it to an integer? Let's say when we try to run this program, so it asks to enter number of items. What if instead of 1010, I type TEN and press enter? So let me press enter and see. As you can see, we got a value error, and it says our input TEN is invalid literal for int function. Even when you enter 10, input function returns a string, but this 10 is an integer literal, right? So int function can convert that to int. But when it comes to TEN, this is not an integer literal. So int function can't convert that to integer. That's why we get value error. So the input which we provide should be a valid integer literal, or else we'll get a value error. The same is the case with float function as well. If you don't provide a valid float literal, it will give you a value error. And there is a way we can handle invalid inputs and value errors more elegantly by using a concept called exception handling. We are going to discuss about that in future. Also, in all these examples, we are trying to read a single value using the input function. But we can also read multiple values at once. But to understand that, we need to know some more concepts like split function, map function, which we will discuss in future. And then we'll come back to input function again to see how we can read multiple values at once. I hope now you understood how to use input function in Python to read the data from the user. I'll see you in the next tutorial.